Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala, aṟahu sundaram lahamum nīyumuṭ abhiṇணamā yiruppōm Arunachala, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala Shiva, Arunachala.
Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about the second verse of Śrī Aruṇācala Akṣaramaṇamālai, and that was Sadhu singing that verse and the refrain. What Bhagavan says in this verse, aṛahusun darampō, ahamum nīyum, ṟabhiṇṇamā iruppōm Arunachala. That means, Arunachala, like aṛahu and sundaram, may you and I uniting be non-different. Aṛahu and sundaram are two words but mean the same thing. So like aṛahu and sundaram implies two identical things. May you and I uniting be completely non-different. There are several alternative meanings for this. One is, I will explain in more detail later, that is the verb iruppōm can be taken to mean either may you and I, or may we be, or it can be taken to mean we are, either way. So one alternative meaning is, Arunachala, like aṛahu and sundaram, I and you will always be or always are completely non-different. And aṛahu and sundaram are not only two words that have the same meaning, namely beauty, they also happen to be the names of Bhagavan's mother and father, respectively. So another meaning is, Arunachala, like aṛahu, my mother, and sundaram, my father, may I and you uniting be completely non-different. While explaining the meaning of this verse, there's one Tamil word that I'll often use, namely porul. Porul is a word that Bhagavan uses a lot in Tamil. Porul is more or less equivalent to the Sanskrit word vastu. Its basic meaning is substance. For example, that is in Advaita, a distinction is made between substance and form. The substance is real, the form is just a temporary appearance. For example, if you have a number of gold ornaments, their forms are different. They may be necklaces, bangles, rings, tiaras, crowns, whatever, but their substance is one. The forms are only temporary, because what is a necklace one day can next day be melted and made into a ring or a bangle or something else. So the forms are temporary. What is real is the substance. The Tamil word for substance in this context is porul. It is the equivalent of the Sanskrit term vastu. So Bhagavan often referred to our real nature or the absolute reality as porul. Sometimes as may porul, which means the real substance, or uḷṛu, the existing substance, which are equivalent to the Sanskrit term satvastu. So as I say, the basic meaning of porul is substance. It also, in Tamil, porul is a term that means meaning, in the sense of the porul of a word is its meaning. For example, in verse 21 of Upadesha in the previous verse, Bhagavan had said, when ego dies, one thing will shine forth as I am I. Then in verse 21, he says, that is always the porul, the true meaning or import of the word I. Nananav sok porul. the meaning of the word I, the import of the word I, is that because though I, meaning ego, is absent in sleep, we do not cease to exist. So, as I say, the basic meaning of porol is substance, but the substance of a word is its meaning. That is, supposing we hear a word of some foreign language but we don't know, it is just a sound, or if we see it written, it's just some squiggles on the paper. For us, it has no substance, it has no meaning. But if we know the language, we know that that particular sound, what it signifies, its substance is its meaning. So the substance of any word is its meaning. So the substance of aṛahu and sundaram is one, because they both mean beauty. Aṛahu is a Tamil word and sundaram is a Sanskrit word. And as I say, also, aṛahu happens to be the name of Bhagavan's mother and sundaram the name of his father. So this analogy has two significances. One is that the principal significance is aṛahu and sundaram are two words that have the same porol or meaning or substance. And also aṛahu and sundaram are Bhagavan's mother and father. So like aṛahu and sundaram, may you and I uniting be completely non-different. That is, though aṛahu and sundaram are different in their form, they sound different, when they're written they look different, but their substance, their meaning is the same. Likewise, may you and I, though outwardly our forms may be different, maybe you and I be one, completely non-different in substance, is the implication. To understand the verses of Akṣaramaṇamālai, to understand the full depth of the verses of Akṣaramaṇamālai, we need to understand them in the context of Bhagavan's teachings as a whole. So often we can understand the meaning of these verses more deeply if we consider them in the light of other works, other verses that Bhagavan has written. So there are two verses in Upadesha that are particularly relevant to consider in connection with this verse. That is, just like the porol, or the substance or meaning of aṛahu and sundaram is one, in verse 24 of Upadesha, Bhagavan says the porol or substance of God and soul is one, even though they differ in their external form and appearance. So what he says in verse 24 of Upadesha is, Irukkum ikayal isa jivagal oru porale ava, upadi unave veru. What that means is, by existing nature, that is in their real nature of just being, God and soul are just one substance. Only adjunct awareness is different. That is, the substance, the reality of both God and soul is what he referred to in the previous verse of Upadesha, verse 23, as uḍṛu, what actually exists, which is uṇṛu, awareness. And that awareness is we, he said in the previous. So our real nature, which is just pure being and pure awareness, in our real nature, which is just pure being and pure awareness, we and God are one substance. What makes us seem different from God is upadi uṇṛu. Upadi uṇṛu means awareness of adjuncts. That is, now, because we are aware of ourselves, that is the substance that is common to God and soul is that fundamental awareness I am, pure awareness of our own existence. So I am is what Bhagavan refers to here as porol. The upadis means adjuncts. Now, when we rise as ego, we are aware of ourselves as I am, but we're not aware of ourselves as just I am. We're aware of ourselves as I am such and such a person. I am this body. So this body, the bundle of 5 sheaths that make up the person we seem to be, that is the set of adjuncts that seemingly separate ourselves from God. So long as we know ourselves as I am this body, we are not aware of ourselves as we actually are, because what we actually are is the one infinite and indivisible pure awareness I am, which is what God is. And because we're aware of ourselves as a set of adjuncts, we also have a certain conception of God. And so God is also, in our view, a set of adjuncts. But the adjuncts exist only in our view, not in God's view. In God is aware of himself as just that pure awareness I am. He is aware of himself as I am I. Or as it said in the Bible, but what Bhagavan often used to point out in the Bible, I am that I am. God is nothing but that what is shining in us as I am. And he's not aware of himself as anything other than I am. So to know ourselves as God, we need to know ourselves as just I am, not as I am such and such a person, I am Michael or whoever. So by virtue of our existing nature, I am, we and Arunachala, Jiva and Shiva, are always one substance, just like aṛahu and sundaram. But to see ourselves as such, we need to see ourselves without adjuncts. So in the next verse 25 of Upadesha Undiyā, he says, Tanne upadi vittu ovadu, tan isan tanne unuvadam. That means knowing oneself, leaving aside or without adjuncts, is itself knowing God. So if we know, now we know ourselves as I am this body, I am such and such a person. If we know ourselves without these adjuncts, in other words, if we know ourselves as just I am, that is knowing God. And then he ends this verse by saying, he says, Tanai olivadal. That literally means because of shining as oneself. That implies because God is what shines as oneself. Since God is what shines as oneself, that is as I am, if we know ourselves without any adjuncts, that is knowing God. So knowing ourselves without any adjuncts means being aware of ourselves as we actually are. And to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, we require all-consuming love to turn within. Why is all-consuming love required? Because we cannot know ourselves without thereby giving up our false identity and everything that goes along with our false identity. So the entire world appears only when we rise as ego. It's only in the view of ego that world seems to exist. So if we know ourselves as we actually are, ego will thereby be destroyed. The world will thereby cease to exist along with ego. So we must be willing to give up everything. So in order to follow this path of self-investigation, we need all-consuming love. That is why Bhagavan's path is bhakti in its truest and deepest sense. This is the true path of bhakti. That is the greatest love. Love is not about what we can get from the one we love. It's about what we can give to the one we love. So the purest form of love is complete self-surrender, when we give ourselves wholly to the one we love. So if we truly love God, we should be willing to give ourselves wholly to him. And we can give ourselves wholly to him only by investigating ourselves, because the nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by attending to anything other than itself, and to subside and dissolve back into its source by attending to itself. That is why Bhagavan says in the 13th paragraph, the first sentence of the 13th paragraph of Nana, Anma chintane tabira, vera chintane kalamba vatiku, satram idam kodamal, atmanishta paranai iruppō, tanne isanaku alipadam. That means being as Atmanishta Param, one who is firmly established as oneself, giving not even the slightest room to the arising of any thought other than Atma-chintana, that literally means thought of oneself or self-attentiveness, is giving oneself to God. So only when we are so keenly self-attentive that we thereby give no room to the arising of any other thoughts are we truly giving ourselves to God. So for this, we need all-consuming love. And such love is possible only by the grace of Arunachala, who is our own real nature. Why is that love possible only by the grace of Arunachala? Because Arunachala is our own real nature. Our real nature is infinite love, because it is our nature to love ourselves. So long as we are aware of ourselves as I am this person, our love is limited. We love this person more than we love any other person, because this person, I am this person. So because of our love for ourselves, we love whatever person we seem to be. So such love is limited and imperfect. But perfect love is infinite love. When we know ourselves as we actually are, we will know that we are the one infinite whole, so there's nothing other than ourselves. So we will, that is the state of the Bhagavan describes in verse 5 of Arunachala Pancharatnam as anyamil ambu, otherless love. So when we know ourselves as that which alone exists, we will then love everything as ourselves, because we will know everything as ourselves. We will not be aware of any differences. That is what he's praying for in this verse. Abhiṉṇamāy yiruppōm. Let us be non-different. So in that state of only in that state of complete non-difference is love perfect. So Arunachala is the infinite ocean of anyamil ambu, of otherless love. So since as such, Arunachala is the source of all love. So in order to gain the love that is required to turn within and surrender ourselves wholly to him, that love is possible only by his grace. And what is called the grace of Arunachala is nothing but his love. That is, because the nature of Arunachala is pure being. Arunachala doesn't actually do anything. But because his nature is pure love, in our experience, that we experience his love for us as grace. And his grace is uncaused, without any cause, because it is very nature. So it's the very nature of Arunachala to be gracious. So Arunachala is always willing to give us that love, but we must be willing to accept it. So long as we have so much desire to go outwards, we are denying the love that is ever present in our heart, the love to turn within. But the more we yield ourselves to that love by turning within, the more that love will manifest clearly in our heart. So that all-consuming love can come only from Arunachala. And since Arunachala is shining within us as I am, to the extent to which we turn within and attend to I am, to that extent will that love rise within our heart and take over, occupy our whole heart. This second verse, I will explain it actually can be interpreted in different ways, but what one of the meaning that is most applicable to us is we can take it as a prayer. We are praying to Arunachala, like aṛahu and sundaram, may you and I be completely non-different. So it's a prayer because it's only by the grace of Arunachala that we can get the love to turn within and thereby experience ourselves as non-different. So like the oneness and non-difference of aṛahu and sundaram, the oneness of ourself and Arunachala, namely Jiva and Shiva, is eternal, immutable, unconditional, and complete. The significance of the word complete will become clear later because there's an alternative way of splitting the word verse So the word complete is also in this verse. Completely non-different is another meaning. So since that oneness, since the non-difference of just like the non-difference of aṛahu and sundaram, but the non-difference of jiva and shiva is eternal, immutable, and unconditional and complete. So it's not a oneness that needs to be forged or created by an act of uniting, but a oneness that needs to be discovered by investigation. That is, we are always one with Arunachala, but we seem to be separate because we have risen as ego, and we are therefore aware of ourselves as a set of adjuncts. I am this body, I am such and such a person. So though we are always one with Arunachala, we now seem to be something separate. So we can become one with Arunachala or regain our oneness with Arunachala only by investigating ourselves and seeing that we are always one with Arunachala. And to investigate ourselves, we need to look deep within ourselves to see what we actually are. So since we and Arunachala are always one and completely non-different, like aṛahu and sundaram, our seeming separation or individuality is just an illusory appearance and therefore entirely unreal. In this context, the word uṭṛu means joining or uniting. But though Bhagavan uses this word uṭṛu, it is not intended to imply that we are ever actually separate or distinct from Arunachala. Though we are never actually anything other than Arunachala, when we rise as ego or jiva, we seem to be separate, because instead of being aware of ourselves as just I am, which is the real nature or swarupa of Arunachala, we are aware of ourselves as I am this body. This body, which is a form composed of 5 sheaths, namely the physical body, life, mind, intellect, and will, is a set of adjuncts. So this is what Bhagavan referred to in the above 2 verses of Upadesha, that is verses 24 and 25, the 2 verses I spoke about. He refers to this set of adjuncts as upadhi. These 5 set of 5 sheaths, these are the set of adjuncts or upadhi that he's referring to. And hence our awareness of ourselves as I am this body is what he describes in verse 24 as upadhi unavu, adjunct awareness. Therefore, what he implies in verse 24 is that this false awareness, I am this body, alone is what makes us seem to be separate from or other than Arunachala, who is not only God and Guru, but also our own real nature, Atma-swarupa. As long as we are aware of ourselves as a body, which is a form composed of 5 sheaths, we cannot know or conceive of a God or Arunachala as anything other than a form. As Bhagavan points out in the first sentence of verse 4 of Ulladu. What he says in that verse is, in the first sentence, Uruvum tānayin uluhu param atram. That means if oneself is a form, the world in God will be likewise. In other words, if we are a form, the world, if we know ourselves as a form, we can only know God as a form, and God and the world as forms. Even if we believe, as many people do, that God is formless, our very idea that he is formless is just an idea, and ideas are just mental forms. So even our concept of God or our belief in God as something formless is itself a form. So we cannot know him as formless so long as we know ourselves as a form. In order to know him as formless, we need to know ourselves as formless, which means knowing ourselves without any adjuncts, because the adjuncts of a form that we now take ourselves to be. So in the second sentence of this verse 4 of Ulladu, he says, Uruvum tan andrel, uvatrin uruvate, kan urudal yaban evan, which means if oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how to do so. So if we want to know God as formless, we need to know ourselves as formless. And to know ourselves as formless, we need to know ourselves without adjuncts by looking deep within. So long as we are aware of ourselves as a set of adjuncts, we will inevitably conceive of God as another set of adjuncts. That is, once we know ourselves, when we limit ourselves as a form, whatever conception of God we have will be something limited. So it is a form of one kind or another. So whatever be our conception of God, that conception of God is a set of adjuncts. For example, generally theists believe that God is all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful. So these attributes of omniscience, omnibenevolence, and omnipotence, these are adjuncts. So what Bhagavan describes in verse 24 of Upadeshundya as upadi unavu, adjunct awareness, includes, and primarily it refers to our awareness of ourself as I am this body. That is the adjuncts, the adjuncts that we attribute to ourselves. But it also includes our conception of God as another set of adjuncts. In a clear view of God, who is our own real nature, Atma-swarupa, there are no adjuncts whatsoever. So in our view, God is all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful. But in God's view, even these terms are meaningless, because for him, there is no all other than himself. That is what actually exists is only Atma-swarupa. So there's not, and since God is Atma-swarupa, there is nothing other than him. So there's no all for him to know or to love or to have power over. He alone exists. So if we take all to mean to refer to many things, then for God there are no many things. If we take all to mean the only thing that actually exists, then in that sense God is all-knowing, because he knows. Because God knows himself, he's always aware of himself as I am. Being aware of himself as I am, that is knowing everything, because there's nothing other than I am. And of course, he loves himself as I am, so he's all loving. And there's nothing other than him to limit his freedom, so he's all powerful. So these qualities we attribute to God, they are true in a certain sense, but not in the sense in which we conceive them. God, the real nature of God is beyond the mind. To know God as he actually is, we need to know ourselves as we actually are, because only by knowing ourselves as we actually are can we go beyond the limitations of mental knowledge, mind knowledge. So this upadi unavu, adjunct awareness, which is what seemingly separates us from God, exists only in the view of ourself as ego or jiva, and not in the view of God or Arunachala. So how can we be completely non-different from God, from Arunachala? The prayer, this verse 2 of Akṣaramaṇamālai, Bhagavan is praying to be completely non-different. How can we be completely non-different? Only by knowing ourselves as we actually are. And to know ourselves as we actually are, we need to see ourselves without adjuncts. We need to know ourselves without adjuncts. In order to know ourselves without adjuncts, we need to turn our entire attention back within to look at ourselves alone. To the extent to which we do so, ego will thereby subside and dissolve back into its source, which is Arunachala. And when we are so keenly self-attentive that we thereby cease to be aware of anything else whatsoever, ego will dissolve completely and forever, thereby merging back into Arunachala as Arunachala. This merging of ego in and as Arunachala, and the consequent dissolution of its false awareness of difference or distinction, Veda Bhava, is what Bhagavan implies by the adverbial participle uṭṭṛu. which, as I explained above, means joining or uniting. So it's not a real, it's a seam. From a perspective of ego, we need to merge back. So we need this merging of ego in its source, in Arunachala, in and as Arunachala, is our uniting with him. But since ego and its seeming separation are not real, its merging back in Arunachala is only seemingly a case of merging or uniting. If we look carefully at what seems to be a snake, and thereby see that it is just a rope, we can say metaphorically that the snake has merged back into a rope, or the snake has united with the rope. But that's just a metaphorical way of saying that the seeming snake has been recognized as a rope. So when we see ourselves as we actually are, we will see that we are Arunachala. So metaphorically, we can say, oh, we have merged back in Arunachala. We have become one with Arunachala. But it's not a case of becoming. It's not even a case of merging. It's a case of just recognizing the truth that we are always one with Arunachala. Even when the rope seemed to be a snake, it was always actually just a rope. Likewise, even when we seem to be ego, we are actually never anything other than pure awareness, which is Arunachala. So what is called uniting with Arunachala is just recognizing that Arunachala is what we always actually are. If we do not know that the meaning or poral of aṛahu and sundaram, if we do not know the meaning of aṛahu and sundaram, we may assume that since they are two distinct or separate words, they each have a distinct meaning. But when we come to know that they both mean beauty, in our understanding, they will thereby merge together and unite as one poral or meaning or substance, as they always actually were. That is, so long as we take them to be two different words, we assume they have two different meanings, so they seem to be separate. When we know that their meaning is one, they merge them. In our understanding, they merge and become one, but they were always one. Even when we didn't understand, even when we didn't recognize that they were two words meaning the same thing, their meaning was always the same. Likewise, so long as we do not know our real substance, our real nature, poral, which is the real substance of God or Arunachala, we seem to be separate from him. But when we come to know our real substance by turning our entire attention back within to face ourself alone, thereby withdrawing it from everything else, including all adjuncts, we will thereby merge and unite with Arunachala as the one poral or real substance that we always actually are. I said all this just to explain why Bhagavan talks here about uniting. It's not that we were ever actually separate from Arunachala, but we seem to be separate so long as we identify ourselves with a certain set of adjuncts. When we know ourselves without adjuncts, we will then know ourselves as Arunachala, because we are never anything other than Arunachala. That is what we always actually are. In these verses of Akṣaramaṇamālai, many of the verses we can interpret in a number of different ways. That is, often there are different levels of meaning in the same verse. Sometimes the different meanings we can draw out is simply by interpreting the words in different sense. That is one way we can see different meanings in the verses. Another way we can see different meaning is by splitting the verse differently, because in Tamil poetry, like in Sanskrit, words are coalesced euphonically. That is what in Sanskrit called sandhi, words joined together. So the final letter of one word may merge with the first letter of the next verse. There are so many, in each language, there are different rules of sandhi. Sanskrit has its own set of rules of sandhi. Tamil has its own set. So these verses, since they're written in a coalesced form, a euphonically coalesced form, in order to interpret the meaning, we need to split them. We need to do what is called Padacchēdam, to split up the words. And often in Tamil poetry, and also in Sanskrit poetry, but generally in any language that uses Sandhi, there are alternative ways of splitting. So one of the coalesced, or one set of coalesced words in this verse is nīyumuṭru. This can be split in two ways, either as nīyum, uṭṭru. Nīyum means you and you. Ni means you. Means and in this context. So nīyum means and you. And uṭṭru, as I explained above, it means joining or uniting. But we can also split nīyumuṭru as nīyumuṭru. Muṭru means completely. So the main clause of this verse, ahamum nīyumuṭru abhiṇṇamāy iruppōm, can be interpreted either as ahamum nīyum uṭṭru abhiṇṇamāy iruppōm, which means may I and you uniting be non-different, or we can interpret it as ahamum nīyum muṭṭru abhiṇṇamāy iruppōm. In which case the meaning is, may I and you be completely non-different. So we can take this it's either as uṭṭru, meaning uniting, or muṭṭru, meaning completely. Since both these meanings are appropriate in this context, we can assume that they are intended to have a double meaning. So we can combine the two of them. We can extract both meanings and combine them together as may I and you uniting be completely non-different. The word Bhagavan uses for non-different is abhiṇṇam, which is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit term abhinna, which means abhinna is the opposite of bhinna. Abhinna means not bhinna. Bhinna means divided, separated, split, broken, distinct, different, or other than. That is like beda. Bhinna derives from the verb bid, which means to divide, separate, split, cut into parts, break, disturb, violate, or distinguish. So a beda and a bhinna both imply what is not divided, separated, distinct, or different. Therefore, muṭṭru abhiṇṇam means completely non-different, indivisible, and inseparable, which implies being non-different. It completely implies being non-different eternally and in every respect. In other words, what Bhagavan is praying for here is the state of absolute and eternal oneness, aikya, or non-duality, advaita, which is our real and natural state. As he says in the first sentence of the seventh paragraph of Nana, yatharthamai ulladu Atma-sarupam andre. What actually exists is only Atma-sarupa. Atma-sarupa means the real nature of oneself. Since Atma-sarupa alone is what actually exists, it is the sole reality or substance, poral or vastu, of both Arunachala and ourself. So what we are praying for here is for the grace of Arunachala to enable us to be as we always actually are, namely as just Sat-Chit, pure being and pure awareness, I am. Separation and differences are not real. They seem to exist only so long as we look outwards, away from ourselves. And we look outwards, obviously, only so long as we rise as ego. But they all disappear when we turn our entire attention back within to see what we actually are. Therefore, in verse 3 of Atma-Vidya, Bhagavan sings, that in this verse he uses the same word abhiṇṇam, bhinnam and abhiṇṇam, but he uses in this verse of Akṣaramaṇamālai. What he says in this verse is, in the first sentence he says, Tanne aridal indri, pinne edu arihil en. That means without knowing oneself, if one knows whatever else, what? What here means in the sense of so what, or what is the use? What is the use of knowing anything else, or what reliability does any other knowledge have if we don't know ourselves? That's the first sentence. The second sentence, he says, Tanne arindidil pin enne ulladu arya. If one knows oneself, what exists to know? That implies if we know ourselves as we actually are, what else is there to know? Nothing else exists for us to know. Other things seem to exist only when we rise as ego. When we know ourselves as we actually are, there's nothing else for us to know. Then in the next sentence, this is the main sentence I wanted to refer to, because this is the one where he uses the words bhinna and abhinna. What he says in the next sentence is, Bhinna Viyagalil, Abhinna Bilaku, Enum, Attanne, Tannil Unara, Minnum, Tanul Anma Prakasame. What that means is, when one knows in oneself, that self, which is the abhinna, the light of abhinna, the light that shines without separation or without distinction or difference in all the separate living beings. That is, when we rise as ego and look outwards, we see so many other living beings, both human and non-human, so many living beings we see. All those living beings, in our view, seem to be aware of themselves as I. So that the light that shines without any division or distinction or separation in all the separate living beings, that is the light of pure awareness, but is ever shining in our heart as I am. So it's a very, very beautiful description. He says, when one knows in oneself, that self, which is the light that shines without any separation. In other words, he's referring to the light of pure awareness. And it shines in all separate living beings. Within oneself, Atma-vichara will flash forth. Atma-vichara means the shining clarity or light of oneself. So the Atma-vichara is that same light, but he refers to as the abhinna bilaku, the light that has the light that is devoid of any separation or distinction or differences. That Atma-vichara will flash forth. The verb he uses here for flash forth is minnam, which is the same word, but is same. Minnal means lightning, the flashing. So the implication here is that like a flash of lightning, that the light of pure awareness, the light that is our own real nature, will shine forth like lightning. And then he goes on to say, aṛahu. This is this is not there, but it implies that this is aṛahu, the shining forth or amorous play or beauty of grace. Aṛahu means grace. Vilasa can mean shining forth. It can mean amorous play, like the play between lovers, and it can also mean beauty. So it's the aṛahu. It's ahavinasa. Ahavinasa means the annihilation of ego. And finally, imba vikasa. It is the blossoming of happiness. And therefore, that is this part of the song Atma-Vidya. So each verse concludes with the refrain, which means extremely easy. Atma-Vidya, or knowing ourselves, is extremely easy. That is, so long as we look outwards, we are aware of the seeming existence of separation and differences. We know ourselves as the subject or knower, and so many other things as knower. So the primary separation is between subject and objects. And further separation appears among objects because each object is separate from every other object. Since we're aware of ourselves as a living being, we see so many other living beings, separate living beings. This is what Bhagavan refers to in this verse as bhinna virgal, separate living beings. But the one light of awareness that shines in all those living beings as I am is only oneself. So since we can never be separate from ourselves, Bhagavan describes this light of awareness which shines within each one of us as I am as a bhinna bilaku, the undivided light, or a light without separation. This undivided light of pure awareness, which always shines within us as I am, this is Arunachala. And when we know it within ourselves, by turning our entire attention back within to face ourself alone, it will shine forth as Atma-vichara, the shining clarity or light of oneself, thereby dissolving our seemingly separate existence within itself as uṭṭṛu abhiṇṇamā, completely non-different, indivisible and inseparable. This is therefore what Bhagavan is praying for in the second verse of Akṣaramaṇamālai. Aṛahusun darampō ahamum nīyum uṭṭṛu abhiṇṇamāy yiruppōm Arunachala. Arunachala, like aṛahu and sundaram, may you and I be completely non-different, indivisible and inseparable. This state in which Arunachala has shone forth within us as Atma-vichara, the indivisible light of pure awareness, our own real nature, and in which he and we therefore remain as uṭṭṛu abhiṇṇamā, completely non-different, is aṛahu, the shining forth or beauty of grace. Because the real nature or true beauty of grace can be known by us only when we have been swallowed by it entirely. This state is also ahavinasam, the complete and utter annihilation or eradication of ego. Because by shining within us as Atma-vichara, Arunachala devours us completely, leaving not even the slightest trace of any bhinna vir, or separate life, soul, or individuality. And since Arunachala is the fullness of infinite happiness, his shining forth within us as Atma-vichara is vikasam, the blossoming of happiness. So this is what Bhagavan is praying for in this verse. Finally, I've explained all the words in the verse, and finally I come to this last word, iruppōm, or the last word before Arunachala. Iruppōm is the first person plural future tense of iru, which means to be. So it literally means we will be. But in this context, we can take it as implying iruppōmaha, which means may we be. That is often, if you want to say in Tamil, may we be, you'd say iruppōmaha. But often in poetry, it'll be said more in a more compact way, simply as iruppōm. So this word iruppōm can be taken to mean either may we be or we will be. So this verse is both a prayer and a statement of fact. So because I'm interpreting these verses from the perspective of ourselves as the devotee, it's from our perspective, it's appropriate to take this verse as a prayer. So we take iruppōm to mean iruppōmaha, may we be. But this verse also, we can take it also more literally, because this is Bhagavan, after all, who is singing this verse. So we can take it, we can interpret it more literally. In which case, iruppōm means we will be. However, in what we generally call the future tense, it can be more accurately described as the predictive tense. For example, even in English, we often use the future tense to refer to something present. If someone asks, where is such and such a person, we can look at our watch and say, oh, it's now 10:30, he'll be there. Meaning we are predicting something that is present because we don't have a direct knowledge of the fact that he is in such and such a place. That we know that normally he's in his office from 9 till 12 o'clock in the morning. So since it's 10:30, he will be in his office. So we are not actually using the future tense as a future tense, we're using it as a predictive tense. So likewise in Tamil, the future tense, it's more useful to consider it as the predictive tense. And because it is the predictive tense, it's often used in Tamil to express what is predictably, typically, habitually, or constantly the case. So in Tamil, the so-called future tense often serves as a continuous form of the present tense. So often the future tense is used in Tamil, whereas where in English we'd normally use the present tense, because it implies what is and always will be the case. Therefore, in this context, iruppōm implies not only may we be, but also we will be. And it also means we will be, it also means we are, and it implies we will always be, or we always are. So an alternative meaning of this verse, aṛahusun darampō ahamum nīyumuṭ ṟabhiṇṇamā iruppōm Arunachala, is Arunachala, like aṛahu and sundaram. I and you will always be, or always are, completely non-different. That is, in this verse, Bhagavan implies that he and Arunachala are, always have been, and always will be uṭṛu abhiṇṇam, completely non-different and inseparable. So if anyone has any doubt about whether Bhagavan and Arunachala are one and the same, we can point to this verse and say, see, Bhagavan has himself said here, he has addressed Arunachala and said, I and you are completely non-different, like aṛahu and sundaram. In other words, Arunachala and Bhagavan are eternally, immutably, and indivisibly one. They are always non-separate. Therefore, though for us this verse serves as an extremely appropriate prayer for inseparable oneness with Arunachala, it is also a declaration by Bhagavan of his real and eternal state of oneness or aikya with Arunachala. Moreover, when we read this along with the previous verse, that is, in the previous verse, he said, Arunachala, you will eradicate the ego of those who meditate on you in the heart as I. This verse also implies that when the ego that was aware of itself as I am Venkataraman, son of Aṛahu and Sundaram, thought of Arunachala as I, deep within its heart, it was thereby eradicated by his grace. And by eradicating it, Arunachala revealed the eternal truth of Jiva Brahmaikya, the ever inseparable oneness of Jiva and Brahman. In other words, what Bhagavan implies in these two verses is that by eradicating ego in the 16-year-old Venkataraman, Arunachala revealed to him that they were always one and uṭṛu abhiṇṇam, completely non-different and inseparable. So from the moment that death experience occurred and that the ego was eradicated by the light of pure awareness that shone forth in the heart, that light of pure awareness was Arunachala. So what was shining through the human form of Bhagavan from then onwards was Arunachala Shiva himself. So Bhagavan and Arunachala are always uṭṛu abhiṇṇam, completely non-different and inseparable. As Sadhuam pointed out, aṛahusun darampō, like aṛahu and sundaram, is more apt than other analogies that are frequently used in devotional literature to describe the closeness and intimacy of God and soul, such as like flower and fragrance, or like moon and coolness. Because though each of these is a pair of closely associated things, they're neither identical nor inseparable, since there can be fragrance without a flower and coolness without the moon. Whereas aṛahu and sundaram are identical and inseparable in meaning. Therefore, by using this analogy, Bhagavan implies that though on the surface, Akṣaramaṇamālai may seem to be a song expressing Anya Bhakti, or love for God as other than oneself, which entails duality. That is, seemingly, Bhagavan is praying to an outward form, the form of Arunachala. So it seems to be, viewed superficially, it seems to be Anya Bhakti. But the underlying import of Akṣaramaṇamālai is actually Ananya Bhakti, love for God as nothing other than oneself, which is devoid of duality. So this analogy, Bhagavan, as far as I'm aware, such an analogy has never been used in any devotional literature anywhere in the world. Bhagavan has chosen two words, a Tamil word and a Sanskrit word, which also happen to be the names of his parents. And these two words have identical meaning. So that is why he prays to be completely non-different, just like these two words are completely non-different. Though the words differ in their sound and their form, inwardly their substance is one, just like the substance of Arunachala and Bhagavan is one, and just like our substance and the substance of Bhagavan is one. Moreover, beauty is more abstract and subjective, whereas flower and fragrance and moon and coolness are more concrete and objective. So this analogy reminds us that the true import of this love song is extremely deep, subtle, and inward. So we can read Akṣaramaṇamālai and understand the surface meaning, but we don't understand the meaning without going deep into the meaning of every word and considering all the shades of meaning, all the levels of meaning that Bhagavan has embedded in this beautiful, beautiful love song. Of course, Bhagavan didn't do this with any intention or any mental activity on his part. These verses of Akṣaramaṇamālai just welled forth from his heart in a spontaneous flow, outpouring of love. But because it came from the original source, the source but it's the real nature of Bhagavan, the real nature of Arunachala, these verses are pregnant with so much deep and rich meaning. And we can be meditating on these verses for many, many years and still seeing more depth of meaning in them. They're such wonderful, wonderful verses. So the fact that Bhagavan used this very apt analogy, referring to not to something concrete. He could have chosen two words that meant, he could have chosen, for example, he could have chosen a word in Sanskrit that means tree and a word in Tamil that means tree. But no, he didn't choose any concrete object. He chose beauty. Beauty is extremely abstract and subjective. That is, they say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So what one person considers beautiful, another person may not consider beautiful. So it's entirely abstract and a subjective quality. So why he chose words that mean beauty, but refer to such as abstract and subjective quality, because he's reminding us that there's far more depth of meaning in these verses than may initially appear on the surface. The more we think about it, the deeper the meaning we can discover in these verses. Another point worth considering here, though as his devotees, we all see beauty in the physical forms of Arunachala and Bhagavan. For example, if we look at a picture of Bhagavan's Bhagavan, we see such love in his eyes. We also see so much beauty in the form of Arunachala. But the beauty he's alluding to here is not just the outward beauty of their physical forms, but the inner beauty of their real substance, their poral or vastu, namely Atma-swarupa, because their physical forms are bhinna, distinct or different from each other. That is, the outward appearance is different, whereas their real form, swarupa, is uṭṭṛu abhiṇṇam, completely non-different. So long as we look outwards, away from ourselves, we cannot avoid seeing differences. So we can see non-difference only by looking deep within to see the real nature of ourself, Atma-swarupa. The beauty of non-difference that we will see by looking deep within ourselves to see ourselves as we actually are, alone is real beauty. If I remember correctly, there's a verse in Guru Vachakakavai in which Bhagavan says something to the effect of, you who seek beauty outside, look within and see the real beauty that is there. It wouldn't be exactly those words, but something to that effect, Bhagavan is saying. The real beauty is the beauty of our own real nature, the beauty of Satchidananda. So all other forms of beauty merge and become completely non-different in that. So rather than seeking beauty outside, we need to seek beauty in our own heart. As in many of the verses of Akṣaramaṇamālai, in this verse, there is an underlying allusion to the Nayaka Nayaki Bhava. That is the devotional attitude of a young maiden who yearns cravingly for the Lord who has attracted and stolen her heart. That is, aṛahu, being the name of Bhagavan's mother, is an allusion to a young maiden, Nayaki, the devotee or jiva, who is referred to here as aham, I. Whereas sundaram, being the name of his father, is an allusion to a devotee's beloved Lord, Nayaka, God or Shiva, who is referred to here as nīyum. The devotee's heart has been stolen by her beloved Lord Arunachala, so she prays to be united with him in eternal and indivisible oneness, the state in which they are uṭṭṛu abhiṇṇam, completely non-different. This state of complete and indivisible oneness with Arunachala is the Akṣaramaṇam, the imperishable marriage for which the devotee is praying in this love song. And being united with him in this state is both the celebration and the consummation of this divine marriage. So that when we think about these verses, there's so many different levels of meaning, so many different perspectives from which we can see the same verse. Moreover, aṛahu and sundaram are the names of his mother and father, respectively. So this verse is also a very apt tribute to them and to the harmony of their marriage. Because by comparing the state of indivisible oneness with Arunachala, for which he was praying in this verse, to the happy and harmonious union of his parents, he implies that though they were different in their outward forms, they were united with one in their thoughts and heart. And there are two other verses in which Bhagavan refers to his parents and a fitting tribute. So I'll just briefly go through these two verses. This is verses 8 and 9 of Arunachala Navamanimalai. In the meaning of verse 8 is in Churi, that means in Tiruchuri, the town where Bhagavan was born, which among the towns of God, in other words, among the Shiva Kshetras in the world, is called the surging place. The reason it's called the surging place is there's a tank, in the main temple tank, in the month of Masi every year, the water rises up. the exact reason for it is not known, but it's connected with the Puranic story of why it is so. And Bhagavan, in later years, when he was asked about this, is it true that the water in that tank rises up? He said, yes, as children, we used to observe it every year. We would carefully observe and see the water rise. But where the water was one day, the next day it would be higher. So it was, it happened every year, Bhagavan said. So in Tiruchuri, that holy town of Shiva, where the water rises every year, I was born to the virtuous ascetic Sundaram. That is, he refers to his father as wait a second, sorry, it's a very difficult verse, this. Yes, Punyan means virtuous. So he's referring to his father as virtuous, and Tavaku as an ascetic. So to the virtuous ascetic Sundaram, and to Sundaram Satiku, to his faithful wife. Sati means a faithful wife. Sundaram. That is, Sundaran with an N on the end. It is a personal form. So he's referring to his father as Sundaran, and he's referring to his mother as Sundaram. Of course, she was always known as aṛahu, but that's the Sanskrit equivalent of aṛahu is Sundaram. So he refers to his father as Sundaran and his mother as Sundaram. So I was born to this virtuous ascetic Sundaram and to his faithful wife Sundaram, aṛahu. And then he goes on to say, there's a story behind why Bhagavan wrote this verse. He wrote it, it's a traditional thing of in ancient times, if a Tamil poet was given a gift by a king, who they used to be patrons of the poets. So the poet would then praise the king, saying, I was born in such and such a place of such and such parents, and such and such a great king gave me such and such a gift. So in this verse, Bhagavan is first he identifies where he was born and to whom he was born, and then he praises the great philanthropist who gave him the supreme gift. So he says, the Red Hill God, that means God in the form of a red hill, namely Arunachala, who appears in the world so that Chinmayam glows. Chinmayam means that which is composed of pure awareness. So that Chinmaya glows. That implies so that Chinmaya glows so brightly that it swallows everything else in its infinitely clear light. And so that Tanmaya means that which is composed of that. Tat refers to Brahman, flourishes. So that, in other words, so that it flourishes implies so that it shines as one without a second. So he says here, what is the purpose of Arunachala? Arunachala appears in this world so that Chinmayam may glow and so that Tanmayam may flourish. Chinmayam and Tanmayam, of course, refer to the same thing, because that the Chit is itself Brahman, who is referred to as Tat. So that Lord, that Red Hill Lord, gave me his state, his heart overflowing with joy, so that the miserable distress of my life lived in the wickedness of the vile senses in the world perishes. And then in the next verse, verse 9 of aṛahusun, Bhagavan says, Ammayam appanam I ene bhumiyal akiyalitu. That means bearing and tending me in the world as mother and father. The implication here is that it's Arunachala himself who, in the form of Bhagavan's mother and father, bore him and tended for him and raised him. So bearing and tending me in the form of in the world as my mother and father. Mahimaye en kadal vindidum yan Andidumun, before I sank, falling in the deep ocean, namely that worldly Maya. The worldly Maya he's referring to here is the delusion of being a mother and father. Of course, being a mother and father is not in itself wrong, but if we, the problem is if we have that abhimanam, if we feel I am a mother, I am a father, that is the Maya. That false identification, I am this or I am that, that is the worldly Maya. So before I sank in the deep ocean, namely that worldly Maya, en manam manni irtu un padatil iruteneyal, entering my mind and drawing me, you fixed me at your feet, in your state. Chinmayanam Arunachala, Ninnaral Chitramay. Arunachala, who are Chinmayan, one, fixed at your feet. That padam means both feet and also state. So, padatil iruteneyal can mean either you fix me at your feet or you fix me in your state. It has both meanings, because the feet of Arunachala is his state, but it amounts to the same. Arunachala Ninnaral Chitram Enne. Arunachala, who are Chinmayan, one who is composed of pure awareness. What a wonder of your grace this is. Here, what Bhagavan is saying in this, when he says, En mana manni irutu padatil iruteneyal, entering my mind and drawing me, you fix me at your feet. He says exactly the same in the next verse of Akṣaramaṇamālai. What he says in the next verse of Akṣaramaṇamālai is, we'll talk about this next time, ahambuhun dietun ahaguhe suriyai amavita dengol Arunachala. Arunachala entering my mind or home, forcibly carrying me away or dragging me out. You have kept me a prisoner you kept me captive in the cave of your heart. What a wonder of your grace this is. So what he says in the very next verse of Akṣaramaṇamālai is the same that he is saying in the last two lines of this verse of Arunachala Navamanimalai, the last verse of Arunachala Navamanimalai. So all these verses, the second verse of Akṣaramaṇamālai and these last two verses of Arunachala Manimalai, they're all a very fitting tribute to his parents, because it is only from such a happy and harmonious union of two such pure souls as his parents, only from such a happy marriage can Arunachala have taken birth in human form as Bhagavan Ramana, our Sadguru and Savior. So the tribute he pays to them in these verses is very apt. Finally, there's one other point about these verses, about this second verse of Akṣaramaṇamālai, but is pointed out by both Murugan and Sadhuvam. That is, they both point out that in this verse, Bhagavan also implies the harmony and inner oneness of Sanskrit and Tamil. That is, unfortunately, due to the vagaries of history, there has, in the last couple of 100 years, there's been a certain tension between Tamil and Sanskrit. The reason being that during the time of British rule in India, they introduced an education policy. That is, a British administrator called Lord Macaulay introduced an education policy in India in the 1830s. And according to that education, that is, the aim of the British was they wanted to educate a generation of Indians who would serve under them as civil servants to run, because they're having having captured such a vast country as India and controlling it with just a small army and a small number of men, they needed Indians to work under the British rule. So they introduced this education policy. According to this policy, all schools had to be English medium schools. So the students had to learn English and one other language. So they could choose either their mother tongue or Sanskrit. So in Tamil Nadu, what happened is the majority of Brahmins opted to study Sanskrit, and the majority of non-Brahmins opted to study Tamil. So whereas previously, any educated person in Tamil Nadu would have studied both Tamil and Sanskrit. So they could read Tamil literature and Sanskrit literature, which is why Tamil literature is so rich with Sanskrit words, and many of the great classics of Sanskrit literature have been translated into Tamil. So there was so much harmony and between these two languages before the 1830s. Afterwards, this was part of the British divide and rule policy. The result of it was those who had opted to study Sanskrit at school, namely most of the Brahmins, could no longer read literary Tamil. They could speak Tamil, but they were not familiar with literary Tamil. So, for example, when Lakshman Sharma first came to Bhagavan, he's a Tamilian, so he knows Tamil. He speaks Tamil. It's his mother tongue. But when Bhagavan asked him, "Have you read Uludu Napadu?" his answer to Bhagavan was, "No, Bhagavan, I'm a Sanskrit student. I'm not able to understand the classical Tamil." And then he asked Bhagavan, he took the opportunity and he said, "But if Bhagavan would like to teach me, I would like to study it." So he was then very fortunate to be taught the meaning of Uludu Napadu by Bhagavan. But so many people who knew Sanskrit well didn't know Tamil, and people who knew Tamil well didn't know Sanskrit. That was an unfortunate thing. So that resulted in a certain tension between the two. Those who knew Sanskrit looked down on those who only knew Tamil. Those who knew Tamil, they thought their Tamil is superior to the Sanskrit. All this sort of differences arose. So what Murugan and Bhagavan and Sadhuvam point out here is that by using these two words, aṛahu and sundaram, Bhagavan is implying that harmony and inner oneness of Tamil and Sanskrit, because aṛahu and sundaram, we can take them as metaphors because they're respectively a Tamil word and a Sanskrit word with the same meaning. So aṛahu is a metaphor for Tamil and sundaram is a metaphor for Sanskrit. So Bhagavan is implying the inner oneness and harmony of the two languages. Why Bhagavan does so? Because both these languages, both are divine languages and both are dear to the heart of God. Because Shiva, Vishnu and other forms of God have been praised by saints in heart-melting verses in both these languages. So there are some people who study Sanskrit who say, "Oh, Sanskrit is Deva Bhasha, it's the divine language." Yes, it's true. Sanskrit is a divine language, but that doesn't mean that other languages are not also divine languages. So Bhagavan is very impartial. So he points out the harmony of both. So though these two languages differ in form and appearance, and though each of them has its own unique qualities, they are each an apt medium for expressing both bhakti and jnana, as Bhagavan himself has demonstrated in his own poetry in both languages. That is, in most of Bhagavan's works, he wrote in Tamil, but he has also written one work of jnana in Sanskrit, namely Upadesha Saraha, and in Arunachala Pancharatnam, he first composed in Sanskrit and later translated in Tamil. So Bhagavan has demonstrated this. But But both these languages are fit mediums for expressing both bhakti and jnana. And Bhagavan is the embodiment of both bhakti and jnana. And Sadhu Om also points out that Bhagavan gives no room here for anyone to claim that he implied that either language was superior to the other. Because though he used the Tamil word aṛahu to refer to a devotee or jiva, and the Sanskrit word sundaram to refer to guru or Shiva, so some people could say, oh, see, Bhagavan has used, God is superior to jiva, therefore Sanskrit is superior to Tamil, they could say. But then he uses the Sanskrit pronoun aham to refer to a devotee or jiva, and the Tamil pronoun ni to refer to guru or Shiva. Such is his perfect impartiality. Just as he views these two languages with such flawless impartiality, he views all languages, religions, races, nationalities, people, species, and everything else with the same impartiality, because his state is uṭṭṛu abhiṇṇam, completely devoid of even the slightest trace of any division, separation, distinction, or otherness. That is, Bhagavan treated all people, whether they were rich or poor, whether they were maharajas or villagers, whether they were educated or uneducated, whether they were, so many very learned pundits came to him, and so many illiterate villagers came to him. He treated all exactly the same. And not only people, he treated all species the same. He showed the same love for the monkeys and the dogs and the cows and all creatures, even the scorpions and the snakes and the hornets that stung him. He treated all with the same impartial love, because he sees all as himself. That is, since he is uḷľupō, the existing or sadvastu, the one real substance, which, though indivisible and immutable, is what appears in ego, in the view of ego, as all multiplicity and diversity, differences and distinctions. That is, he is the one I am, the one common factor in all beings, in all forms, in all everything that is manifest. He is the one substance of everything. So he sees everything as himself, and he loves everything as himself. So Bhagavan was perfectly impartial in his treatment of languages, religions, people, whatever their race, whatever their caste, whatever their nationality, whatever. Bhagavan treated all equally. For example, religion, Bhagavan was treated people of all religions with the same impartiality, and he would speak to people in the language of their own religion. For example, when Christians came, or he would refer to the Bible. He would point out that in the Bible the name of God is I am, and that Jesus said, before Abraham was I am, and that Jesus said, no, look, see, the kingdom of God is within you. So he would point out things in Christianity that are in accordance with his teachings. And on one occasion, there was an all India conference of Islamic scholars, and they happened to hold it one year in Tiruvannāmalai. So after their conference was over, they came to visit Bhagavan, and these are all very learned Muslim scholars. So they came to Bhagavan, and one of them asked him, Swami, what is the one goal of all religions? Bhagavan said, salam. Salam means peace. And then they said, and what is the way to attain that goal? He said, Islam. Islam means surrender. So he expressed his own teachings, but in the language of their own religion. So Bhagavan was impartial to he saw the same in everything. He saw the same good in the same truth in everyone, and the same truth in all religions. likewise, among Hindus, many Bhagavan, outwardly, he may have seemed to be a Shaivite. He sang in praise of Arunachala, so he seems to be a Shiva Bhakta. But so many devotees who came to him, they were very staunch Vaishnavas. So Bhagavan would often refer to the Narayana Divya Prabandham, the songs of the Alwars, the great Vaishnavite saints, whose songs are the basis of the Bhakti movement, but later spread throughout India. So Bhagavan knew all those songs, and he would refer to those songs, and he would often point out the verses where there's a clear Advaitic import in them. So in that way, he would bridge the gap. He would bridge over all differences and let people see what is the truth in all religions and in all. So Bhagavan was so completely impartial. So this verse is a very nice illustration of that, how he was impartial in his view of Tamil and Sanskrit. Of course, Bhagavan had a very special love for Tamil. Most of his poetry was in Tamil, but he would never tolerate people saying that Tamil is superior to Sanskrit or that Sanskrit is superior to Tamil. All are equal in his eyes. And even us, even though we are so low, however unworthy we may be, he is equally gracious to all of us. So this is a great consolation to us. We may feel that we are very imperfect, we are unfit for his grace or anything. There's no such, nobody can be unfit for Bhagavan's grace, because his grace is uncaused grace. His grace is, because his very nature is grace. Grace is the infinite love, but he has for each one of us as himself, because he sees us as himself, he loves us as himself. So his infinite love for us as himself is what manifests as his grace. So his grace is his own real nature. It has no cause. So there's no one can be worthy of his grace, but nobody can be unfit for his grace. His grace is equal to all. So this is a very great consolation to us. However unworthy we may feel ourselves to be, he has chosen to take residence in our heart and shine in our heart eternally as I am. So nobody is unfit. If we want to know him and to be him as we actually are, he has shown us the way. All we need to do is to turn our attention back within and see him ever shining in our heart as I am. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramana